the show slide. Before I click the show slide button. So my name is Adam Josephs, and I have a small boutique consulting firm called Celerity Consulting. Celerity means speed in Latin. It's where accelerate comes from, and C for the speed of light. And fundamentally, what we do is work with technology companies on accelerating product development. My personal background, born in New York, went out to California for Stanford, worked in Silicon Valley for Apple and Microsoft, eventually came back to New York, did a few startups, and Celerity was founded in 2000. We had our 20th anniversary last year. We decided to throw a pandemic. So thank you all for coming. I spend about a third of my time in computer, hardware, software, consumer electronics type companies. And a third of my time in what we call high tech. And these would be our biotech companies, our semiconductor chemical companies, and then a third in random other things. Because at the heart of our work is how to build high performance teams in the face of significant risk and complexity. And that's where our work becomes the most leverageable. With that, let me activate my slides. All right. And what I want to emphasize here, and what the objective of this talk is to really start to think about all the risks that are you need to be anticipating on the way to commercialization. And obviously, we won't be going through and identifying all those risks. We want to think about the areas, but more than that, I want to give you some potential approaches on how to incorporate risk identification in your activities and use them to be managing your initial projects and your initial pitches for funding. All right, this is stuff we talked about. The first thing is the difference between research and development. Some of you, you've dealt with this before, you've internalized it. Some of you need to be whacked on the back of the head, and will have to do that several times over the course of trying to get something out the door. At Apple, we had an advanced technology group, and on their business cards, it would often say, cool guy or cool girl working on neat things. And the emphasis when you're doing exploratory work, and traditionally in the sense of academic research, is you're in an exploratory mode and you're looking to innovate. You are hoping to find surprises. There's a profound satisfaction of increasing a level of understanding of phenomenon. And as you design and execute on experiments, you want to learn something, adjust, pivot, iterate, and you want to be efficient in your use of time and the resources in your lab, and you want to have fun. And this is why you've selected this as your careers, and it's part of the nature of the game. Now, when you move to development, things become, well, they should also be fun, but it's a shift in context, right? So now the philosophy is, how can we do it fast and cheap in a cruel entropic universe where we operate in environments of global competition and different approach substitution and dislocation of technology. You need to get stuff done, and you often need to get it done quickly. Even when you're thinking about operating quickly, you still don't have permission to ship anything less than a quality product. However, that needs to be defined something close to that which delivers customer perceived satisfaction. Now, if you're developing a medical device, if you're developing a drug, that has all sorts of implications around regulatory approval, as well as all the things that the market requires. Your job is to reduce risk. You really want to do as little as possible and no less to get that out the door. You would like to borrow, beg, buy, steal, everything you can in order to deliver your value proposition as quickly as you can. And hopefully you can innovate as little as possible. Your investors, of course, are looking at what is going to be their return on investment, because instead of just promising a new and exciting, and revolutionary and world-changing piece of technology, potential molecule, something to be done in the life sciences, you're asking them to make an investment with a commercial reward, be that through bringing something to market or just setting it up for whatever the appropriate acquisition or merger might be. Again, do less sooner, and you can still have fun while you're doing it. Okay, I'd like folks to take a minute and write down what you believe are your 3 biggest risks against commercial success for the projects or the businesses that you, or the technologies that you are thinking about. And let me check with Carol and Matthew. Are folks allowed to speak, or should they chat? I'd love to hear what some of their responses are. Is that possible? I'm not, everyone's on mute, so I'm not hearing anyone.
If we can allow them to go in chat, or I'm trying to see if there's a way to.
Okay.
Here, hold on.
Let's not get bogged down on this, because I want you to, so still write down your 3, and then when we go to Q&A, you can share some of these or give me answer some of the questions I want to ask. So we'll just move on. So let's talk about risks against commercial success. So technical feasibility, does the thing work, is very much on the list. But beyond that, your risks lie on markets. Is there any money to be made here? Staffing. A number of clients I'm just in the middle of, their biggest issue right now is, can they bring on the people to take this great idea to prototype stage, because they can't, and they're having problems hiring the right engineers and lab technicians. How are you, is there beta testing? There's a huge level of complexity in just getting initial customer feedback. And I watch scientists and biotech environments spend enormous resources to address those types of risks and frustration at how imperfect the process is. All of this, of course, you just throw in a pandemic on top of it, and life has gotten that much more interesting in the last year. For many of you, regulatory approval, what's necessary for that is a huge thing that has to be anticipated. Competition, production, all these things make your life that much more difficult and are just nests of potential failure modes on the way to commercialization. If this isn't scary enough, there's another column here. You may need partnerships. There's a whole level of risks around doing that work. What about the costs? I see a lot of technologies get displaced because a different technology comes along that's at a lower cost. Or what often happens is an existing technology just gets ahead of the game by reducing their costs. And all of a sudden, your profound innovation at a significantly higher cost becomes much less attractive to the customers that could leverage it. And then mergers, risks against funding, which I think is one of the things that is very much at the heart of this webinar series. And then the things that you may not have thought of at all. And what does it mean to execute on your plan in the face of acts of nature? And obviously the last year has been rich with that. The last 3 bullet points is I want to hear if there's anything on here that you didn't miss and excuse me, that I didn't list. Let the process of de-risking drive what your schedule is and also your funding pitch. Prudent investors will have, frankly, limited attention for hearing all the great things your product does, and the good ones will want to hear, tell us all the challenges you're up against, and what are you going to do about it? If all those risks are not scary enough, it really is the world that you're living in that looks like this picture. Well, what is this picture? Well, it's a bird going after the worm, except of course, it's not. Those of you who notice the first slide or even the painting behind me. The bird woke up and thought they knew what their problem was. They have to get another worm. You are probably spending most of your day worrying about getting the technical device, the drug correct, the molecule correct, running the appropriate assays and proving that you're getting the results you want in the lab. But what distorts projects and destroys teams are not the risks that they were most obsessed with. It is the risks they had the least experience with. This bird thought it was going to be about a worm today, but actually, of course, it's about fighting the snake. Now, this graphic showed up in Harper's Magazine in 2009 in an article about the 2008 financial crash. I particularly enjoy showing this slide at places like Goldman Sachs. So you want to operate that you have yet to uncover your biggest risk on your project. You have something that works. That's what got you into the conversation around potentially productizing and commercializing it and getting outside investors. The stuff that will happen and you have to handle on the road to actually getting profit and having a business is stuff, first off, that you haven't thought of yet. And secondly, is probably outside your expertise. And if you're like any of the other accomplished scientists that I've worked with, you're very often the smartest person in the room. And now you have to go into a world where you must be obsessed with leveraging the expertise of other people and assembling a team that not only will execute, but will help you identify what those biggest risks are. There's an added problem. So we have all these risks that are in a whole multitude of areas. What's going to screw you up is stuff that you probably haven't even thought of yet. And you're also operating on this curve, where, as you can see, the x-axis is time and the y is the cost of making a change. And most projects, particularly those that are in trouble, will often find themselves making late changes where it is the most expensive. Our anecdote that we like to talk about is the fact that they had to fix the Hubble telescope while it was in orbit. It would be much cheaper when it was down on the ground. And the Mars Climate Observer, where they discovered one group was using metric units and the other was using English units while it was trying to go into orbit. And those are very expensive fails, and one of them is a do-over project. I see this all the time on teams, and it is something that when you get it in your bones, that you want, that your first job is to find a way to shove as many of the changes you can to the front end, that you have something that you want to start organizing on your projects. And in fact, your earliest milestones should be about identifying risks and mitigating the biggest ones. That's how you will demonstrate that you're actually making progress. And some of those risks may be technical, and some of them may be in all the other categories that we've begun to discuss. Okay. Now, shifting risk identification mitigation to the front is not just a game of working smarter. It is literally an allocation of resources. So one of the issues that you may be facing is, what expertise do I need to get on my project early, if nothing else, so you can leverage those new areas of expertise to identify risks. So it's tempting for a team to that is focused on the biggest thing, getting a piece of technology to work, to be heads down at the front. And yes, of course, we need to worry about regulatory, and we have to worry about doing the downstream types of experiments, about partnerships, about acquisitions. And it's tempting to, well, let's first get this piece working. Okay. But what I want you to consider is bringing that expertise up front and inviting them to tell you all the reasons why you're going to fail, so that you can decide which among a portfolio of risks you need to be in action on beyond just getting the thing to work. Again, context is decisive. When you're deciding on your experiments, your objective is not getting something to work. It is getting it to commercialization. And there's clearly an overlap of the Venn diagram overlap of those ideas, but they are different, and they are different optimizations. And in scarce resources, you have to make hard decisions about that. And you may need additional expertise to hone your time in the lab, let alone the other cross-functional activities that you'll be doing in order to make sure you're making as direct a progress toward commercialization as you can. In fact, we're not going to get into a prolonged conversation on project management here, but I want you to consider this, that when you're thinking about what are the committed dates that you want to make, that there's a set of activities that have to take place that a team must wrestle with upfront in order to make a quality commitment. And so we get to work in a whole range of industries because we're fundamentally agnostic on what our clients are doing, let alone the industry that they're in. And we just want you to consider that at minimum, there's two phases. Up front, you want to be focused on what risks do we have to understand and potentially mitigate, or have our plan to mitigate, in order to make commitments on when we'll be there with the final product. So this also is sets a bar for the level of technical performance you have to demonstrate before a commitment to hit a delivery milestone is credible. But it also involves taking activity and getting smarter and mitigating risk against the other things that must be converging later in the project in order to get to those key deliverable milestones, and of course to commercialization. And so defining what we have to demonstrate when in a larger universe of areas, and having those conversations up front is critical to setting yourself up to success. So it's not just we got the assay to work in our lab, but really we have to get it replicated. We have to show that it can be replicated. We have to use samples that are coming from with a company in agri-science, and it is the samples from the animal farms. And can we even get them off of the collection material in order to show that our system works? And then you get, well, how are we going to collect it? And do we FedEx these things? I mean, these are the issues that high-tech companies and hardcore science companies trip over all the time. And the earlier you have conversations around them, the cheaper it is to adjust your plan and to take mitigation. All right. So let's say you've assembled, or I've gotten you to think of, like, we've got to bring in people, we need expertise, we've got to ask a whole bunch of questions, and we want to get risks in these areas on our plans. How can I do this? Well, first, let's talk about how teams and teams of human beings talk about risk. Well, they don't, because there's enough to do now, and I know what I'm doing, so I really don't want to have to talk about what's wrong in my area. And I really don't want to start challenging what's going on in someone else's area, because, well, we're only doing this over a Zoom call and they won't like me and it won't be team building and all that, right? The other way is, well, people start, complaining or yelling at each other, right? That'll never work, okay? And often, especially Zoom calls these days, the expert, the scientist will be quiet because he knows or she knows the Zoom call will end, and then I'll just go back in the lab and I'll make sure it all gets taken care of. Both of this just kills conversations for exploratory conversations on risks. Here's language that we often hear. So, there's nothing we can do about it. No one wants to hear it. They'll never change. It's not my job. We do this all the time. Risks are surprises anyway, right? They'll take it as criticism, and I'm doing everything I can already. Human beings are not particularly comfortable standing in their ignorance, but that is indeed what you want to do when it comes to identifying risks on your projects. And we have a particular structured language game that helps teams identify and mitigate risk. So in the realm of, you get, what do I want you to take away? So here is a particular tool that you can use, and it is a mechanism to change how your teams talk about risks that increase the likelihood of action. And it's something we call cause, effect, impact. It's a structure to talk about risks. So if I said to you, I'm afraid I may get into a car accident on the way to the store today, you might say to me, well, drive safely, or order in, or you might ask me, well, why are you concerned like that? Or it's only 2 blocks away, what's the big deal? If I said to you, the tires on my car are balding, i.e. the tread is wearing thin, and therefore I may get into an accident on the way to the store, all of a sudden you might initially say, well, get your tires changed. I want to propose that the second articulation of that risk is inherently more interesting and useful than the first articulation. Because what I've done there is I've uncollapsed the way we usually talk about risks and given you the logic of what I'm saying. Normally, we talk about our risks are opinions about the future. So the assay will never work, or it'll never work for coccidia, but it works for salmonella, or that'll never be cheap enough, or we'll never get the parts in time. And people may agree or disagree or get defensive because, well, what do you mean? Of course, my assay is going to work and all that. Any opinion you have about the future is rooted in an assessment of the present. So really, if you're worried about the assay not working, it's that we have no, I love this risk that came in from a junior lab technician at one of my clients. We have no backup to the lab refrigerator. And the effect is that we may do a bunch of experiments that then are ruined if there's a power failure or a failure in the refrigerator. Now, when you put it that way, you're going to get a lot of agreement. Wow, half the people, really? We don't have a backup? And actually, in this case, it saved the project because they quickly got a backup generator. And, you know, of course, the power went out at some point. Or we only have 2 technicians to build the unit in the lab, and we really need 5. So the effect is we're not going to get the product done on time. It's funny because if you're accusing someone that the product won't get done on time, they may get defensive. But all of a sudden, if you start identifying that they need more resources, they won't. They probably have a new ally. It's like, yes, I need more technicians. Creating a norm in your community and on your teams to articulate risks as simply part of their membership in getting your work done is such a critical dynamic that puts you ahead of that cost of making a change curve. And allowing those risks to talk about commercialization, like the prototype can't be moved, right? So we won't be able to send it to a beta site. You know, let alone we have no idea what the competitive cost structure is, or what the cost structure of our competitors are, what you know, what the storage requirements of competitive drugs are. And so are we, you know, if we had that information, then we would, you know, plan our experiments slightly different for that end stage piece of where our technology has to wind up in order to be commercialized. Okay. So a cause is a specific condition. It literally must have happened. We have 2 lab technicians and the plan says we need 4. My tires are balding. Okay. An effect is the possible bad outcome on your project. And the impact is why your venture capitalist and your investors would care about it. Okay. So would double the cost, or would slip the schedule by 6 months. Or would make it unusable for company, for customer X. The second thing I want you to appreciate is there's 3 phases for risk mitigation. The first, and it's important to keep them apart. The first is identification. You want to hear risks from everywhere. So I know teams have rich conversations for risk management if I'm hearing about risks about the quality of the food, or let alone the absence of a backup generator in the lab, right? Everyone's spending all their time talking about the big #1 technical risk, but thank God you heard about a backup generator being missing. That's why you want to involve a larger community and really poll, you know, crowdsource your risk identification. The next, once you're allowing things to populate, and of course, I want to stress these things must be written down or they will just vanish. I'm fine, write it on a whiteboard, an Excel sheet, and those of you who get more complicated, Asana and Jira and all that, feel free, but just get it written. Then you want to prioritize it, see what comes up to the top, and then you can make intelligent decisions about spending scarce resources on mitigation. Let's talk about the second piece, prioritization. Now, here's a very simple one-axis model that has proven to be very productive. And it's a little counterintuitive. Again, the things that empirically screw projects up are not the things the team is the most obsessed with. They are the items and the areas the team had the least experience with. So I want you, when a risk comes in, or if you're writing a risk or identifying a risk, to ask these questions. That would lead you to have a super high risk is something that no one's ever done. Now, when I work with software companies, not a lot of super high risks. When I work with life science companies, a bunch of super high risks. So of course, you've got stuff that you're doing around the core science that should get articulated about the risk. No one has ever sorted salmonella in a solution of XYZ in 3 minutes or less, et cetera, right? If no one's ever done it, it's a super high. A high risk is someone's done it, i.e. we know there is a proof of concept, but we've never done it. A medium is we've done it, but it's not a core competency, and a low is a core competency here. So if people are submitting risks on quality of food, that usually gets sorted down to a medium or low. But if someone raises an issue of we have to raise $10 million, we've never done that before, or we have no experience in that, that clearly goes to the top. Or if we need to identify 3 beta customers and we haven't yet, could be a cause. The effect is we won't have beta test sites lined up in time. And no one in the company has ever run a beta program or got, no one in the company has done that before. But we know in the universe, there are lots of people who know how to do this. That's an example of something that might be a high risk, but not a super high risk. You want to constantly be in action on your super high and high risks. Now, if you're thinking commercialization and you're populating your risk list with the science and engineering folks, odds are you're probably not going to hear risks outside of science and engineering. Or what you'll hear is, we have no one on the team is experienced in sales. No one on the team is experienced in raising money, depending on where you are. Great, and those would be, well, probably high risks because people have succeeded. They managed to find folks, but it tells you where you need to bring some folks in, if nothing else, to hear what your biggest risks are. And then out of the portfolio of the risks from the whole variety of areas, you can make decisions on where you're going to spend your resources. Incidentally, your investors will often help you with this. And if you can come with them with a structured game, like we specifically want your risks, and you can train them in the language or not, but you invite them that we need to populate our risk list. They will help you. God knows they have opinions. And then you can bring the prioritization to see what's going on there. Also, it's reassuring to them that you're willing to ask the question, what are my risks? I.e. that we don't even know what our biggest risks are. I can tell you all sorts of risks in the areas that I'm an expert in, but we recognize that we need risk identification in areas that we don't even have that expertise. And the sooner, the better. This is...
Adam, I hate to interrupt you here, but I feel like it's a crucial clarification point. This is Matthew, by the way, not the voice.
Hi.
When you're dealing in that quadrant of unknown unknowns, how does one make certain that they have the right team to even list those risks?
It's an excellent question. And the answer is first off, you will never have the right team. You will start your projects and you will have you will think you have the right team, but you want to keep reminding yourself it's not the right team, but it is in the identification of risks that the team will discover in what way it's not the right team. So in the when I see teams come together is they will identify where they think they're missing resources, where they're missing expertise. You involve those experts and they will identify the next round of expertise that you need. So the good news is the process bootstraps itself. The other thing that's good news is probably you're trying to commercialize a technology in an area where other people have commercialized. So you can ask folks, where do I need expertise? And because I'm making this talk very generic, if you're producing a drug or a molecule that has the potential to be a drug, then there's a set of expertise you need for that. If you're producing a biomechanical device or something, there's a different set of expertise that you need. The teams are very good when given permission to think about where they're missing expertise at coming up with a place to start.
Thank you.
Sure. I wanted to show here this, if you were just so you can visualize it, this is what a risk table looks like. And I want to point out it has a number. You can give it an area that it's in. So you have risks in marketing. You know, if you're producing a molecule or a drug en route to a drug, then you'll have you might have regulatory. You'll have NIH risks. You'll have lab infrastructure risks. If you're producing a mechanical device, you will have manufacturing will be an area, and supply chain will be an area. And you want every risk to have a unique identifier. So one can say, I have an idea, or I want to look at risk number 6. And I encourage you, you know you're doing well when you have dozens and dozens of risks on them. Again, use the prioritization to help you focus attention. Cause, effect, impact. Again, we want to advocate this language tool that I'm throwing out. This is one of the things, if we could patent it, we would patent it, and our clients come back for more because it's a very, very powerful tool. It can save you, first off, from just getting generic risks like the assay isn't going to get done in time, but also it short circuits the 10-minute communication of a risk, right? Where people want to go on and it takes 10 minutes for them to communicate it. Cause, effect, impact. Very powerful language game. Prioritization, every risk should have an owner. Their fundamental job is to know the status of that risk. And you want to propose mitigations. Once you have a risk and it's prioritized, then you can assemble a room of folks in a room to come up with good mitigations, let alone execute them. Okay. Some brainstorming, you want some great ideas. You want to hear a wider range of ideas than you might be comfortable with, and then you can make decisions about which ones you actually want to fund. Okay, so
Adam, we got a couple of questions come in. Do you want to? It looks like you're approaching the end, so do you want to wait until the end of your slides, or you want to hit them now?
Let me get the end of the slides, and then we'll take them all since we are that close.
All right.
So your objective is commercial success. You're no longer producing an amazing thing in the lab. You're no longer discovering something. You now need to recognize your context is, can this be turned into something that will get investment? You're going to need more expertise than you already have, and then use use what your top risks are to drive what your milestones are. That the focus of your energy are to should in a large way be de-risking your effort and knocking off those top risks. Constantly be asking the team what our biggest risks are. And that is something you want to ritualize that because you get smarter and smarter, and assume your biggest risk has yet to be uncovered. So don't just do this once. You want to do it regularly, every week, every month. poll the team, what's the most likely reason that that individual thinks we may fail, and give them permission to put anything they want on the list. Okay. Have tools that your teams are going to use and normalize it as a behavior and an activity and a structure on your projects. All right. From there, this is, you see, we love the graphic so much, we put it on the front of the book. Let me stop there and let me start taking some questions.
All right. So the first question that we have from the audience is, how would you advise equity allocation for the starting team who may not be the right team, quote unquote, e.g. missing skill gaps?
Right. So I'm not an expertise on that. It's a very important question. But let me give you some guidelines. There are, especially when it comes to risk identification, you can rent that expertise. So they may not even be full-time members, but you can bring in consultants who are expert in area X and have them participate, and therefore you're doing a fee for services. For folks that are coming in that are critical for commercialization, i.e. the end steps, like they may be key in your manufacturing, I advise that they be highly valued, because you want them pushing to, it's great if you know, they know that their high value, let alone when they're going to really see the payoff, is going to occur by making sure that we are on a path to some of those later stage, more mature milestones, and they start thinking about them now. So I think that's a balance. But again, I wouldn't position myself as being strong and experienced on making those decisions. But you know, I have seen teams do this, and these are some of the things I would say you should consider.
Another one that we had coming through chat is it ever too early to mitigate a super high risk, and how would one know if it is?
Right. Well, so it's never too early to identify it. One of the things that, you know, you're mentioning the early, I'm sure one of the things you're wrestling with is, does it work enough to even try to productize it, let alone get investors? And if you do an accounting or an investigation on how many super high risks are we facing at this point, and I'll give you a thing, if you have more than a half dozen, you may want to knock a few of those off before you feel comfortable presenting a commercial case. As far as once you've identified a super high risk, is it ever too early to take action? And the short answer is no. But when you bring expertise on mitigation to it, you want to come up with a rational plan in that, look, we're never going to really know if it doesn't, you know, kill mice until we give it to a mouse. But until, because we are on this curve of the cost of making a change, what could we do now to increase our confidence that will be good when we get there? And that's where teams start getting creative on, well, you know, let's add this extra, I'm making all this up, but, you know, let's add this extra dimension to the simulation. Or is there a similar molecule or something that we can test toxicity on that will give us a little, you know, take on how difficult it's going to be? So the short answer to your answer is no, it is never too early to start mitigating a risk. You'll bring your expertise, but absolutely get moving on them. They may be with you for a while, but start taking action now.
All right. Thanks for that really comprehensive answer. Next question that we have from the audience is, what's your opinion on categorizing / prioritizing risks on a severity by likelihood matrix?
Yes. Well, I have a degree in decision analysis and statistics, so I can talk probability of technical success till the cows come home. I work with lots of companies that are deeply rooted in FMEA and all that. Extra risk. What teams need to get moving is buckets. And the faster they can identify risks and get them in buckets, the better. So it's having done this for a long time and viewing the world from just these measures of frequencies in the universe. I'm going to tell you that you can do both two-dimensional as well as additional, because you forgot severity and detectability. Sorry, you did mention severity, but detectability gets in there as well. You start getting diminishing returns very quickly. What we would propose is get the risk conversation going. We absolutely recommend you start with the axis that we've proposed. If something's really scary, i.e. you think it's really severe and the whole thing will blow up, then we would just say, bump it up a level, right? So ask the hard question about, have we done it before, and stuff. The problem, and if you're really scared, then just move it up one level. Here's the problem with probability. In areas where you have limited experience, there is volatility on your volatility assessment. You are not qualified to evaluate whether something is easy or not. That's a very sobering wall for teams to run into, but you've never done this before and you're trying to decide whether this is a probable risk. And we see teams trip over this all the time, right? It must be easy to code a print driver until, unless you have a team that's never done that before. And actually, frankly, would it be just, you should try it a little earlier in your schedule than you might otherwise plan. So that's the problem of coming up with, the fancy curve as your initial take on risk prioritization. But, try it out, and to doing subsequent and more detailed analysis is fine. But I strongly recommend start with the 4 buckets, with the ability to promote something if you think it's really scary. And then if you want to do additional risk analysis and prioritization, feel free.
Thanks for that. This next question is the bane of commercializing research tech. Is the audience member asks, say you are a pre-proof of concept and have identified your biggest risk. The only problem is that you need funding to mitigate this risk, and inventors want the risk mitigated before investing. Thoughts?
Yeah. Well, this is where you need to get more creative in your risk mitigation. There's 2 things. If this were easy, we would all be cranking out life-changing molecules in the lab and life-changing devices in our garage. So you have my deep sympathy and admiration. Bootstrapping, if you know what your biggest risk to get to concept, but you need money. It's funny when you read the best practices on this of how do you at least get moving. Unfortunately, they come up with alternate funding sources just to get something. Friends and family and the angels and whatnot. Not to just leave you with that example. What I would say is the richer you can get in understanding your risk profile, the more persuasive your argument may be to get some money to mitigate this. So doing some investment and getting some feedback of, are you both the level of measurability of where you want to go with this, your commercial objectives, where you think it could really work, et cetera, but also, and these are the, there's 6 big risks. If we could just get smarter on this incrementally, then that would give you a more persuasive risk profile. So unfortunately, that's all I got there. Low interest credit cards, a kind department chairman, a really good grant writer.
Those are all fair points. I think the biggest takeaway from that one is frequently those really early investors are looking for signals that the risk can be mitigated. So while the risk can't be mitigated completely, if there's any data that you can generate that suggests that you're on the path towards it, and an external party would believe that, that's always valuable to see. So far, I'm looking at a blank Q&A slate, so I'm going to give it a couple of moments before we wrap up. But just in the interim, Adam, I want to thank you for a really fascinating talk. It was different categorically from the kind of conversations that we tend to have, but it was really valuable to hear your perspective on how to structure these kind of projects and how to think about risks when we're moving from research and towards development.
My pleasure, and I'd love to hear any feedback. I think my email address, adam@celerityconsulting.com, is on my picture, perhaps, and love connecting on LinkedIn at Adam Josephs, and of course, you know, there's a book, but love to chat if anyone wants to speak offline.
We've got one more before we wrap. Oh,
Sure.
Two more, excuse me. The first is any advice on how to present novel tech that directly competes with incumbents who are well-funded, and well-funded is emphasized.
Yes. Yeah. That's the thing. So I read an amazing book when I was working in Silicon Valley. David Off, I forget the VC, but he said one of the most important things that people leave off their pitches is, what will the competition do once they learn what you're doing? So you need to assume that they find out, and you've got to have a story about, you know, if they just lower their prices, do you just lose your whole business? So I acknowledge you for asking the question, and this has got to be a critical slide. Not just what are they doing now and how you compete, but once you enter, what are they going to do to knock you out? The big thing is, you know, you have to, and again, not my core area of expertise, but you need to differentiate, and you decide how you can exist in a market where you assume they're going to exist. And you know, there's the old thing of who can get to market faster. And how can you create the secret to the universe, which is some kind of monopolistic position. Right? So the better your story is on those fronts, the more interested people will be. And other than that, I will turn to Matthew and his expertise bank to give you even better advice.
I think it's context dependent, and we can talk about that one offline because I know the questioner. The next question that we have is to follow up with that catch-22 question. Would you say that onboarding a new advisor who can convince investors that the risk is mitigatable is a solution?
If they're credible, and you know, you're dealing with high tech, so and your investors hopefully have their scientific advisors. So if you're able to have an interesting conversation where you can show not only that you have a solution, but also that you have access to expertise and you know how to use it to mitigate your risks, I think that works in your advantage. But assume you're going to be challenged, and you know, have a good get your story and get data.
All right. Well, it looks like that's a wrap on questions, and to that end, we'll make it a wrap on this week's session. So Adam, once again, I want to thank you sincerely for a really fascinating and instructive session on how to manage projects and how to address risk up front, especially when we're thinking about these complex technological projects that we have coming out of the university. So thank you for that. And then to the audience, I want to thank you for once again joining us, New Ventures for the Business of Bioscience Bootcamp. As you saw at the beginning of the session, this seminar series will be going throughout the rest of the fall, every Friday at 12 to 1 p.m. So please join us again next week, where we'll be talking about indication and prioritization for life sciences. All right. Thank you, Adam, and I'll wrap it here.